Please be seated. The court is back in session. Before I hand over the floor to the civil party lawyer, the chamber wishes to respond to the request made by the defense counsel for Ieng Sari for the transcription to be made as early as possible, and the chamber wishes to advise the defense counsels as well as parties that the transcript is not within the management of the chamber. It is within the portfolio of the court management section. By experience, the transcript may take some time. However, I also wish to advise the court management to prepare this transcript. If it can be made available sooner, it would be beneficial to parties. And the chamber wishes to also remind parties that defense counsel and parties to this proceeding have assistant to assist you while you are participating in the proceedings. They may make use of the assistance of their colleagues to take notes of the proceedings. I now hand over to the civil party lawyer to continue his line of questioning. You may proceed. Counsel Hong Kam Soon. Thank you, Mr. President. And good afternoon, Mr. President, and good afternoon, Your Honors. And good afternoon, Professor David Chandler. I would like to now resume my line of questioning before we broke for lunch. And I would like to follow up with the question relating to the sending of Mr. Ieng Sari to Beijing to liaise with Si Hanuk. Was it the anticipation of the Communist Party of Cambodia when they took control of the country, or it was happening simultaneously when the Communist Party of Cambodia came to power? Document IS 6.2 EON 002403, English 00244274 200442778. This document is about the mobilizing of forces dated July 1975. That particular document also made reference to the name of Prince Norodom Sihanouk, and you may refer to the relevant EON page I mentioned earlier. I would like to read it out in Khmer. we could control even Sihanouk, both his power and politics. It is in our control.
គាត់នៅមានឥទ្ធិពលជាងអ្នកដទៃ
Before he was powerful and influential, but now we are more powerful. Everything is in our hand. Even the royal palace is under our control, so there won't be any problem coordinating and working with him. Now we know that he can work with us. He is satisfied so long as he can stay with us and travel around. So it is a golden opportunity for us to strengthen our forces. And in the future, if he deviates from our team, then he is going to be casted away.
នួនខ្ញុំចង់សួរលោកសាស្ត្រាចារ្យថាគោលនយោបាយដែលបកកុម្មុយនីស
I would like to continue from this passage. You mentioned that Ieng Sary was sent to liaise with Sihanouk in Beijing. So it seems that this was planned earlier on before they came to power. Is that a correct conclusion of that?
I think you can infer that conclusion. We've covered a bit of this before. I just want to make certain that that they certainly had no interest in returning Sihanouk to any kind of genuine power at any point. And as I mentioned earlier, also, and it's mentioned in one of the documents and the footnotes in Pol Pot Plans the Future, that the death of Zhou Enlai in early 1975 gave the CPK impetus to move against Sihanouk, since they now believed, and I think truly, that he no longer had the level of support in China that he'd enjoyed. So I think the official word in 1971 would have been liaison, and that's certainly the way that Ieng Sary would have described his task when he was there. But what the actual intentions were, it's impossible to say, so I won't.
Thank you. I would like to now move on to ask question about the royal government of National Union of Cambodia under the leadership of Prince Sihanouk and its relationship with the National Liberation Committee led by the Khmer Rouge forces. Can you enlighten the court about the negotiation before Cambodia was liberated in 1975? Can you enlighten the court whether or not the two teams would not envisage that they would concede to accepting once again the monarch administration?
Well, they certainly wouldn't agree to such a thing in public and be able to keep Norodom Sihanouk in command, but I think he sensed that this was going to be his fate, and he's mentioned that in all his volumes of memoirs.
Thank you. During the break, I met with the victims of the Democratic Cambodia, and I would like to seek permission from Mr. President to put a general question to the expert, particularly in order to clear the confusion of people in general, that people went into the Maki jungle at the appeal of Prince Norodom Sihanouk, and that led to the many casualties. So I would like to ask from the expert's opinion whether or not this was a genuine appeal by the prince, or it was the trick plotted by the Khmer Rouge.
Well, in a way, it was both. I mean, it was a genuine appeal. It was his voice. It's an appeal he's admitted making. I don't think he was given full authority to write the actual text himself. But this is, again, a supposition. I'm sure he was not told by the Khmer Rouge, say anything you like. This was a controlled speech. Wasn't quite, in fact, a trick. I see why you've asked that. But it was more like, I think, to give the Khmer Rouge some credit, a recruiting tool. I think they knew that the prince retained a lot of popularity in the countryside, and they thought that they could get more support by joining the front that has just been, by secretly joining the front that had just been set up in Beijing. This turned out to be the case. We still don't know, and I said this morning, how many people heard the appeal, how many people obeyed the appeal, how many people, once they had gone into the Maki, found that the situation was not something that pleased them and left, how many were executed. You can say some people at each one of those stages. But some people heard, some people accepted, and so on. But we can't say how many or how effective it was. Certainly, there is evidence in 1975 that the coup enraged some of the rural population sufficiently so that they could storm into, I think it was Kompong Cham, and assassinate Lon Nol's brother there, who was considered to be, part of the problem as the brother of the man who's. So there was certainly anger there. How long that anger lasted, how well it was mobilized, I can't say precisely.
Thank you. I would like to expand a bit further on this particular topic. I would like to know about the plan before the liberation of Phnom Penh in 1925. Did you study the resolution of the Communist Party of Cambodia, which decided on 8 points following the liberation of the country? The resolution dated the 20th of May 1975. It also mentioned a policy that may overrode the policy of the royal government of the National Union of Cambodia, and that is document IS 4.26. I would like to seek permission from Mr. President to display this document. The President, you may proceed. Mr. Hong Kum Suan, thank you. I would like to now read out the 8-point policy. 1. Evacuate people from all towns. 2. Abolish all markets. 3. Abolish Lon Nol regime. Abolish Lon Nol regime currency and withhold the revolutionary currency that had been printed. 4. Defrock all Buddhist monks and put them to work growing rice. 5. execute all leaders of the Lon Nol regime, bringing with the top leaders. 6. Establish high-level cooperatives throughout the country with communal eating, and 7. Expel the entire Vietnamese minority population, and 8. Dispatch troops to the borders, particularly the Vietnamese border. And the President, the National Council for Mr. Ieng Sari, you may proceed. Mr. Angadam. Mr. President, I do not have any particular objection, but it is my suggestion that whenever my learned colleague presents any document in court, the document should be put up on the screen and the identity of the document should be made clearly as well. Mr. Hong Kam Suan. I only noted earlier that the document is only available in Khmer. Relevant EON is 00315051. And document IS 4.26. I only have Khmer copy with me. The President. Council, can the document be shown on the screen?
The
President. It is advisable that parties should frame the question in a more concise way, and so that the witness can respond to the questions more appropriately. Mr. Hong Kam Suan. Thank you, Mr. President. Professor, I have just read out the 8-point policies to you. Do you have any observation or comments in respect of this policy?
No, and I don't have any specific comments. I am reading them in Khmer on the screen. They're certainly very clear, the set of policies that they set out. I think in almost every case, these policies were followed. The level to which Lon Nol officials or so on were executed has never been entirely clear. The purge, as I said earlier, stopped or slowed down in late '75. The other policies were adhered to throughout the regime, and it's interesting, as you pointed out, it hasn't been mentioned before. A set of paper currency had in fact been prepared for the regime. Printed in, I think, in China for the regime. They rejected using it, which suggests that the decision to abolish money may have been later than some of the other decisions, that the other policies were already in place. But that's just, again, a supposition. We know the money, which you could still buy in the market, was never circulated.
Mr. Hong Kam Suan, since I'm running out of time, before I hand over to my esteemed colleagues, I would like to put my last question to Professor Chandler. My apology. I would like to bring up one more article, one more document, E3/17, Article 31, ERN in Khmer 008 2 My apology, I confused this document. I would like to check with my colleague first.
សូមពេលតខ្ញុំសូមកែតម្រូវឡើង
The document from the book entitled Voice from S21, relevant year and page in Khmer 00191846, and in English 00192694. With Mr. President's permission, I would like to have this document shown on screen as well. The President, you may proceed. The President, please make sure that your mic is activated.
នៅក្នុង
Thank you, Mr. Hong Kim Suan. According to this document, I would like to read it out. The Democratic Cambodia leaders give the most attention to the functioning of S21. The Deputy Secretary of Communist Party of Cambodia, Mr. Nguyen Chir, explained to a group of the Danish delegation who paid their official visit to Cambodia in July 1978 that we had to protect the leadership apparatus at all costs. If we lose members, but we can protect the leaders, then we can rebuild our force. We can lose hundreds of members, but we could not afford to lose 2 or 3 leaders.
ពុំដូច្នោះទេ
Otherwise, the party would not move forward effectively.
តើគំនិតនេះមេដឹកនាំកម្ពុជា
Can you explain the court that whether or not it was the sentiment of the party at that time that the leaders were that important and they would take care of the welfare of the leaders even at the expense of the ordinary members? And Mr. President, with your permission, I would like to present this document to the witness. Mr. President, you may proceed. Court officer, please obtain the document and present it to the witness.
I was following along with the Khmer. This is a famous passage, I think very revealing about the operations of democratic Cambodia, primarily because it was given, as most documents to foreigners were not, to someone that seemed to inspire trust. So therefore, in answer to your question, my opinion, and it is an opinion, is that Nguyen Chia, in making these statements, was completely sincere and was describing a policy that other evidence suggests was indeed widespread in the party, that the protecting the leaders of the party was of extreme importance. Deutsch has said the main objective of S21 was to protect Ankar being the leadership of the party. So this is a very forthright and articulate statement of policy that is quite rare in the sense that it was made from one of the leaders by name to a named foreigner. This is a very interesting disclosure for that reason.
Thank you, Professor. I have to hand over to my colleague now, and I thank you very much, Professor, for responding to my question, and your response is very helpful. Thank you, and I would like to now hand over to my esteemed colleague. President, yes, international lawyer for the civil party, you may proceed.
Bonjour, Monsieur.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the civil parties. Good afternoon, witness. I'm going to put a few questions to you that will be quite quick because our time is limited, and my colleague Olivier Baoun will continue with more factual questions. First of all, I wanted to revisit an issue that was brought up, the issue of secrecy. The CPK's policy or favored secrecy, or in any case, the senior leaders did. So my first question is the following. If it was clear that during the Civil War, that is to say before 1975, it was necessary to remain anonymous and to remain in hiding and to not to disclose oneself, why, however, was this cult of secrecy continued after the victory of 1975? Why was it necessary to proceed in this way?
That's an excellent question. I think it was, I would, with permission, rephrase this slightly. It certainly wasn't necessary to do this in any sense, but it was felt to be necessary by the leaders. The reason it was felt to be necessary because this is a policy that had succeeded for so long, had kept all the major leaders out of Sihanouk prisons, and they saw no virtue in explaining who they were and what they were doing, and a great virtue in continuing what had been for them a very successful policy. I agree it's baffling to outsiders, but that's my explanation.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much. You brought up yesterday and the day before examples. You gave us examples of this practice of secrecy. So the decisions by the leaders were surrounded by this secrecy. And however, you also spoke about the situation of the Cambodian people who, on the other hand, were subjected to total transparency. They were not supposed to have any secrets at all in the face of Ankar. So can you share your opinion with us about this? Was it always the same strategy to have secrecy at the government level and this obligation of transparency?
That's a fascinating question. It's hard to answer because it's got very interesting substance from my mind. The point is, I think, to make is that the leaders of the party were transparent to each other, and this levels of transparency weakened as you went further down the line. As I mentioned, I think yesterday, we know pretty much for sure that all the leaders of the party prepared biographies which were examined by the other leaders of the party in self-criticism sessions, demanding transparency of each other. They demanded the same transparency with no option to keep it quiet of the rest of the people, because people outside the Communist Party, which were forced to share this mutual transparency in study sessions, biography writing and so forth, were trusted. And the rest of the people were not trusted to keep secrets. They were not trusted really at all in many ways. So they were required to open up to the regime so that it could examine what they were up to or who they were. But the transparency inside the party was quite high, and this is one of the great ironies. I mean, when we saw the letter from Hu Nim this morning, he knew exactly who the leaders were on the party. He knew their names. He knew how to write to them, but he was an insider. No one else in the country could have used those 5 names as the same facility. Or no one else outside the party, of course, what I meant.
Merci, Monsieur l'expert.
Thank you. A question that comes to my mind now, you spoke about Ankar. And the usage of this entity, which was set up, I believe, as of 17 April. Of course, you told us that this was the leading entity and that the senior leaders were hiding behind this mysterious entity. But beyond this circle, was it possible to portray a fearful image of power in order to control the population, to instill fear?
Yes, I certainly think it was. People were not told what Ankar was. With interviews I've conducted and other people have conducted with survivors of the regime, many Cambodians thought Ankar was a person. The word means organization, but they thought it was a person's name. There's a single person behind this, an unseen person, and one of the sayings of the survivors was that Ankar has as many eyes as a pineapple, meaning Ankar, which they claimed, the officials claimed also, can see everything. It can see everything that's going on. We know who you are. And of course, as I said earlier in another context, this is the same as saying this room is filled with enemies. I mean, the listeners wouldn't know who was saying that. It could possibly be someone, probably was someone in the village, a representative of the party. They might not know who that person is. People would walk around underneath their houses at night listening to their conversations. There was surveillance and control. But if you asked, and Cambodia, as every people in the room know, is a very, how do you say, personal nation. They kept saying, who is this? No information. So it is frightening. Very unusual for Cambodia to be told, who's saying this? Say, I won't say. That's a secret. It's not normal, not natural.
Merci.
Thank you. Let me move on now to another question and revisit the issue of the new people. You said yesterday or the day before that the new people were the main enemy of the regime as of 17 April. Because the new people symbolized imperialism. Was this the only reason why these new people were stigmatized and considered enemies? Are there any other explanations that may let us understand why they were alienated this way?
Yes, I think the simplest explanation was, by definition, the new people in the towns, and these were the towns that had not yet been cleared out by the Khmer Rouge. As I said yesterday, I think several towns had already been evacuated and the population driven out of them, Udong, Stung Treng, Krache, and one other. These people, by remaining in the towns, were by definition people who had not participated in the revolution. And since that was the only approved behavior for the Cambodian population, these people were outside that group. This made it very easy for them to be defined as an enemy, a kamang, or a traitor, a kabot, to the winning group, the Communist Party of Kampuchea. The other dimension of the usefulness, popularity among in the ranks of the CPK for calling these people an enemy is again something I'd mentioned before, is that city dwellers themselves were named as the main enemies of the rural population. Rural population were told that American bombers were coming from Phnom Penh. So people, there's lots of evidence of this. The forces that entered Phnom Penh and some of the forces that entered from Battambang, there's evidence there, were extremely angry. They'd been told to be angry. They'd been told this was a place that was not just a Western American, but a place that was out to destroy them. The cities. And so the cities were the place of the new people, who were also, just by definition, people who had not taken part in the revolution, which makes them, in Khmer Rouge thinking, not us, but them, in other words, enemies.
Thank you. You have just referred to Krache and Udong. And when this evacuation took place, the people who were evacuated from these cities were not called new people, or were they?
I have no information on that. I suspect they weren't treated very well, but I don't remember that the phrase new people was in use before 1975, April 75.
Merci.
Thank you. On the basis of your research, you covered facts on the evacuation conditions of Phnom Penh. That is to say, what were the food conditions, the sanitary conditions, and how the people received these new people who were thrown out of the town. Do you have any elements, any specific elements on what the conditions were like during the...
Pretty consistent survivor reports are that the conditions were awful. This was, as people know who've lived in Cambodia, the New Year, which is when the victory took place, is the hottest time of the year. There's less fresh water, incredible temperatures. The people were flung out of the city, no matter what age they were, what health they had, without many possessions, and without any sense of where they were going. I think there were very harsh conditions indeed, and these conditions, of course, fueled the narratives of new people who, when they surfaced, if you like, after 1979 and came, and many of these people remembered the conditions of the evacuation. But it seems to me there are so many accounts that are not contradictory and that support each other, so many independent accounts, where that the conditions were awful. I guess what could not say this in extenuation, but it's a matter of consistency with a lot of DK policies, is the feeling that doing things in a hurry was the correct way to do things. Doing things slowly was the old way of doing things. So in other words, people were not allowed a day or so to prepare. And besides, as I said in my previous answer, these people were not considered to have any value whatsoever as human beings. These were not people that the victors respected. These were people who had chosen not to join their ranks. So therefore, they would, if you find in some of the materials in the court documents that I read, not the closing order, but other documents that I've been given to read, some of the officials now regret what had happened then and say that they regretted it at the time. But this regret was not widespread, and it resulted in no action, like slow down, stop this. Nothing happened at the time. It was colossally harsh from the start.
Merci.
Thank you. As a historian, were you able to find comparable elements to this tragic evacuation in other historical events? Are there any possible comparisons elsewhere?
Well, again, I mentioned, I think, it's getting a blur. I can't remember if it was yesterday or the day before, but certainly this has a historical precedence in Southeast Asia. The report of the trial on Wednesday, I think, mentioned the Burmese evacuation of a Yutia in 1767, poured all the people out. I had not mentioned that myself, but the writer knew about that. And preceding that, what I did mention, 1832, a Thai evacuation of Phnom Penh when the Thais invaded the country. So it's in a kind of a tradition in Cambodia. There were elements coming from China of partial evacuations of some cities as a sort of pilot programs the Chinese were trying to do, because they also wanted to de-urbanize in the high tide of Maoism, de-urbanize the Chinese society. And we know that the evacuation of the cities was praised afterwards by Chinese officials who said, you know, I wish we could have been able to do that kind of thing, but our country is too large and complicated. But that de-urbanizing society in the declining years of Maoism was a great an ambition of communist regimes. But no, nothing as severe as this in recorded history. I can't speak for the Mongols. I don't know that they evacuated people, but Alexander the Great. But no, certainly 19th century in Southeast Asia, partial things in China, nothing as big in recent memory, certainly.
Thank you. Yesterday, you reminded us of what you wrote in your book. That is to say, the way the new people were qualified and the way the new people were treated. And very quickly speaking, I'd like to remind you that you spoke about, in particular, deportation in 1976 to the Northwest, forced labor that the new people were subjected to. You described their situation as slavery. You also reminded us that these new people did not have the right to vote during the only parliamentary election that took place. And you also said that these new people were completely hopeless in the eyes of the regime and that their death was of no matter. And you also said that after having consumed the new people, the senior leaders moved on to something else. That is to say, purging the cadres. So the new people were not the only ones who suffered from the power and from the tendency to destroy. So my first question is, was there a desire to destroy, period? To destroy the new people? And then my next question is, was the treatment imposed on the new people, such as forced labor, this dehumanization, the stripping of rights, was this part of a plan to isolate this group of people, to alienate it, to characterize it in a way of as non-Khmer, although they are Khmer? So on the basis of your research, do you have this feeling, or can you share with us your opinion on this question?
This is a very controversial issue, and one that I don't think my own opinions are particularly authoritative, but I certainly have them. The evidence I have is that there was no systematic intention on the part of the leadership of the party to destroy the new people. This would have meant killing, for one thing, killing a lot more people than they killed. It also would have meant eliminating, as we know, the number of new people probably was in the vicinity of 3 million, 2.5 million. It would have ruined their country. I've been teaching the history of Cambodia over the years, and an image I use, it probably wouldn't apply in Cambodia, but if you've seen enough American crime movies, I think the way it operated was what you see, a man coming into a store with a gun, and he says, "Everybody behave and you'll all be all right," or comes into a bank. And the ones who don't behave get shot. The ones who do behave, the employees of the bank, he goes away and they continue to do what they're doing, goes away with the money. So that seems to be the way it was. They threatened these people with that terrible motto and showed them that they thought they were worthless. And this was a mindset that had been drummed into them during the Civil War, that the people you're opposing you are not Khmer, they're not behaving decently, they're behaving barbarically. But I don't sense any it's certainly not documented if there's any intention to produce what Jean-Luc Couture called autogenocide, to produce this effect. It was an effect that was produced to a large extent by chance, by ferocity, and by other things like that. Now, another point, a clarification, of course, labor was enforced. Labor was enforced on everybody in the country. Base people did not get out of working much harder than they had ever worked in pre-revolutionary times. Everybody worked like just a lot all day in the sun. Slave labor was also national because there was no remuneration for any labor. The point is, some of the most difficult work in some of the most inhospitable parts of the country were given to new people, I think purposely because a certain amount of casualties in those cases made no difference to the regime. 10, 20%, that's fine. Down in the Southwest, where you had a very effective, quite severe government under Tamok, you have no evidence of that kind of thinking that we can lose 10 or 15% of the people by driving them too hard. They were overdriven in these areas where the new people were, because, but the whole country was working well, except for perhaps a handful of people, and were working much harder than they ever worked before. Now, I don't also see Khmer was a word that the DK never used. They never used this word. That word was associated with Lon Nol and with nationalism. They used Kampuchean, meaning Cambodian people. They're trying to avoid the racial characteristic that had so characterized the Lon Nol regime. This changed in the later parts of the regime. In 1978, war with Vietnam, they start talking about the Cambodian race. And you start getting a shunt, one of these many shunts I've been talking about, toward a real Cambodian bodies, Vietnamese heads. They become non-Cambodian. But they never referred to used the phrase not Cambodian to of the new people, whereas Lon Nol in his regime had referred to the communists as Tamil, the word coming from Sri Lanka for Tamil meaning non-believer, which with the same effect. These people are outside my moral ambit. In other words, go ahead, you can kill a non-believer the same way you can kill an enemy of the people. Just a different term for. But that's a very complicated issue. But I think we want to. I'm certainly not able to find or documentary evidence that there's a systemic policy at the top to destroy the new people as an entire group. That so many of them lost their lives, it would seem to many of the survivors, of course, that there must have been such a policy, or else they wouldn't have died. But you have to say in Cambodia under DK, as I've written somewhere, there were 6 million stories. There were 6 million stories, and we've heard some of the stories are true. Many of the stories are true. Many of the stories have never been told. So it's very hard to say they were all intended to whatever.
What you just said leads me to another question, which will be my last one. The leaders conducted this revolution for the base people to be liberated. And when we listen to what you just said, we may ask ourselves whether there was not some kind of betrayal vis-à-vis the base people on the part of the leaders.
That's a nice question. I'm sure that some of them did feel this. But when they talked of liberating the base people, they did not talk about liberating them from hard rural living conditions. They talked of liberating them from something that not all of them knew was the case, but some of them did, and these people provided forces for the Khmer Rouge. This was to liberate them from the unequal and unjust social arrangements that had always characterized Cambodian society in terms of rich and poor, the haves and have-nots. They were have-nots, and they were told, now you will have. What they would have was not more freedom, more rights, more, you could almost say bourgeois values, more right to vote and so on. They would be free from oppression from those people. They're also less oppressed by the new leaders than the new people were, because they were the preferred people. But they weren't preferred in any material sense, except that you hear that food supplies were better handled in some of the areas where you had experienced cadre and fewer new people. There was maybe less starvation, and there was better control over production. But no, the base people were freed from feudalism, which many of them had no idea what it was. They were freed from, quotations, feudalism, freed from oppression by the cities, which some of them felt, some of them had no concern about. They didn't even know what the cities were like. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. You would have to say, when they came in, did you really feel you were? But if they were talking in material terms, they have to say no. This is all ideological. It's an ideological liberation, it's an empowerment without any material components, except for the ones who were given guns. That's an empowerment. You're given a gun because you're on our side. So that's a bit of material, but otherwise not. So you can say they were betrayed from our point of view.
Thank you, expert witness. I have no further questions. Thank you very much for having provided important clarification on these points. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président, mon confrère Olivier Baoun.
My colleague Olivier Baoun will continue with the questioning. So it might be a good time now to take the break so that he may ask his questions in one go.
You may proceed, Counsel. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, and good afternoon to the bench. Good afternoon, Mr. Chandler. I'm Olivier Baoun. I've already had the honour of taking the floor before this court. Mr. Chandler, I'd like at the outset to begin my questions by bringing you back to some quotations you made at the hearing here in case number 1, the trial of Duik. And you quoted the Milgram experiment when answering a question from my colleague François Roux, and you indicated that you were particularly interested in the Milgram experiment, and you described it, and you said that after the study it had been found that 70% of the people who were subjected to the test had pushed the questioning right through to the highest possible voltage. I had a look at the study myself as well, and it would appear that today it's very important to take account of the context and the conditions within which obedience occurs. And Milgram basically explained that it's very important, before you're looking for an individual explanation for obedience, to take account of the pressure that's being exerted on the individual who is due to obey. What I want to do now is ask you a handful of questions to ask you, in terms of everything you have studied and your personal experiences and your sensitivities, if these elements can be considered to constitute what could be called obedience, or a context thereof.
Defense Counsel for Mr. Evidentiary, you may proceed. Counsel Angotom. Good afternoon, Mr. President, and my apologies once again for the interruption. With regards to the reference to the testimony during case 001, the testimony of one professor, I am not aware of the scope of that reference. Which testimony are we referring to? Where is it in the transcript and on what page? How is that portion of the paragraph is going to be used? The President, International Counsel for Mr. Nunche, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with my colleague on the other side that the Milgram experiment is a fascinating experiment, but I would like to point out that Professor Chandler's expertise is, of course, not in the field of psychology or any type of these psychological experiments. I do not know exactly how my colleague will be phrasing his questions, and I'll be interested to hear them. But if they in any way call on the expertise or any supposed expertise of Professor Chandler in the field of psychology or any type of clinical psychological testing like in the Milgram experiment, then I will object. So I just want to make that clear before actual situations are put before Professor Chandler.
Je peux répondre.
Thank you. I can answer that. To my Cambodian colleague from the Yangsari team, of course, Professor Milgram didn't testify. It is a reference that came up in Professor Chandler's testimony. If you are interested in acquainting yourself with the document, it's ERN in Khmer 0036 1545. English ERN 0036 1454. Turning now to the second question. Indeed, you don't know what my questions are, but you're going to be able to find out. Let me say that my purpose is to determine the existence and the role of elements that make up a context in which people obey. Professor.
The President, has the Council responded to the objection or the concerns raised by the Defense Council? I don't think you have done so, Council. What is your reply to the objection or the observations made by Defense Councils for Mr. Ieng Seri and for Mr. Nguyen Chia? Defense Counsel for Mr. Ieng Seri asks you to identify the identity of the document you would like to refer to. Yet we have another objection from the Defense Counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia.
Picking up the objection made by my learned colleague from the Ieng Seri team, I gave the ERN references of the transcript of the hearing which Mr. Chandler attended in the case number 1, the trial of Doik. And these are the actual pages of the transcript in which these things are referred to.
President. And what is your replies to the Defense Counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia? Counsel. Defense Counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia objects to the substance of your questions, which refers to the psychological assessment, as the expert before us is not a psychological expert.
Mr. President, I answered that as well, because my colleague said that I haven't yet heard the questions. And so I will ask the questions, and then he can decide if my questions are ones rooted in a need for psychological understanding. But the expert is somebody who has very considerable knowledge, experience, and awareness, and that may come into play as well. So I think I've answered the question there, Mr. President.
The President, now you may proceed with your question then.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Professor, can you tell us what education level had been attained by peasants in Cambodia in 1975? Is it possible to talk in terms of a scale of good, very good, good, medium, poor, very poor? Where on that scale would you situate the level of literacy among Cambodians in 1975?
I can only give you statistics that I can't give you precise statistics. Certainly, the levels of illiteracy were highest among women and elderly people, lowest among young people who had been to school. Now, how many of those young people had been to school in the Sihanouk period? Quite a lot of them had been to school. And I was, I must say, surprised to an extent when I was working on the Tuol Sleng files to see how literate literate some of the people were who admitted their education had only been through 3 grades. They could write fluently, they could type. So it's hard to, but they were all peasant background. But certainly the levels of education were not high. They were perhaps not shameful in terms of Cambodia's resources, but this was not a country where there were enough schools for the growing population. And the further back you got into the countryside, some parts of the country had no education, no educational facilities at all. I'm drawn to the one-line anecdote of Tamok's sister was found by enterprising reporters in 1990 sometime, and she said she'd never seen a European until she was 50 years old. So this was a woman who was living way off the main road. When you get that far off the main road, you also don't have a state primary school, a state high school, or whatever. So the levels of education in the back parts of the country were unavoidably very low because these people were basically inaccessible. But at a certain level, it was higher than one might expect in terms of, the only way I could observe that is in the handwriting and literacy capacity of the guards at Tuol Sleng who were writing material in their autobiography said, I've only been to 3 grades of school. So after 3rd grade, I could not write as well as they could. So they may have had their education later or something, I can't tell.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Professor. Staying with the hearing in case number 1, and I'm talking about a Khmer ERN of 0036 1546, English 0036 1456, French 0036 1720. In that text, you said that people who gave orders were used to giving them, and those who received them were used to obeying. There was no culture in Cambodia consisting in challenging orders coming from people who held authority. In other words, a teacher was never called into question. Professor, presenting themselves as intellectuals, did Khieu Samphan and Ieng Sary enjoy a particular status?
I'm not certain what kind of, if Ieng Sary enjoyed a particular status, because I have no record of what effect his teachings had on his students. We do know, very interesting, it fits right into your question, that Pol Pot, as a teacher in the same school as Ieng Sary, got a very high opinion from his students, not because he was allowed himself to be questioned, but because he did not bully and dominate the students. He was gentle with them. He listened to them. He was a person that a survivor told me in a very interesting sentence. He was a man, when I met him when I was 14, could be my friend for life. Next sentence, he killed my parents. This was an impression this man made of being a non-conventional teacher. Khieu Samphan, as a teacher, the reputation I think he had as a teacher was very good. He had an excellent reputation in many, many ways in the pre-revolutionary period, as a teacher, as a journalist, as a singularly uncorrupt member of the National Assembly, as a conscientious cabinet minister. All these things earned him respect, not in a conventional way of the kind of respect given automatically to a boss, but respect because his conduct was unusual. In other words, Cambodians were quick to recognize when someone was behaving in a humane or interested way, but I still stand by my sentences in the sense that this was not the way most authority relationships were conducted. They were conducted in a very authoritative way, without any question of being allowed to talk back. And I should just add there the word for obey in Cambodian from the word to command. So it doesn't mean obey in an English sense or obéir in a French sense. It means to be commanded. You're in a condition of being commanded. That doesn't mean you're in a position to choose whether you can say yes or no. You've been commanded. You've been told what to do. Pra ba bra, the two words in Khmer. I think it's an important distinction.
Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you, Council. Thank you, the experts. It is appropriate for us to take a short break. We will resume at 3 o'clock. Court officer is now instructed to accommodate the experts and return him to this courtroom at the said time. The court is adjourned. All rise.